Hi, I'm Dr. Walter Matwaychuk, and the purpose of today's video is to help you deepen your understanding of REBT's distinctive ABC framework. We use the ABC framework, sometimes referred to as the ABC model, as a way of better understanding our emotional experience and self-defeating reactions. It's a framework that allows us to identify the different components of our reaction such that we can begin to modify those components and cultivate a healthy response to the adversity we face. So it pays to have a thorough understanding of the ABC model because REBT is simple but not simplistic. Now, the ABC framework starts with the letter A, which we refer to as adversity, and define adversity as a negative state of affairs. Now, the important thing to understand about adversity at A is that it's our thoughts about the negative state of affairs that really constitute the adversity. Now, that adversity, that negative state of affairs, does not necessarily have to be occurring in the present. What's occurring in the present is our thinking about some negative state of affairs that may have taken place some time ago in the past, or it may very well be a negative state of affairs that we anticipate happening in the future. So we may, for example, think that tomorrow my supervisor may speak to me in a way that suggests I'm not doing such a good job and feel anxiety today. What's important is that you learn to distinguish between what we call the situational A and the critical A. A situational A is the objective description that a recording device would pick up in observing you facing an adversity. It would pick up the sounds that you may utter, the sounds other people may utter. It would also pick up images of your reaction, what you do, your facial reaction, the facial reactions of others. This we call the situational A. So many times people will think that they have identified the adversity and move on to the rest of the ABC framework by delineating the situational A. This is a mistake to do. It is far better to go beyond a mere description of the situational A or a description of the negative state of affairs that you are having an emotional reaction to, and identify what we call the critical A. Now, the critical A often is an inference. An inference is a big word for a hunch. It's a thought that goes beyond the observable data. Inferences or hunches cannot be recognized by video recorders. They can't be identified. In comic strips, you might think of them as the bubble that comes out of your head that reflects your internal dialogue. So the critical A are the thoughts you have about the situation you find yourself in that is a negative state of affairs. Now, these critical A thoughts are most often hunches, but they can also be evaluations, thoughts that evaluate things as bad or come to conclusions such as, I'm going to fail. That also would be something of a hunch, I guess. But the point being, whether you call them hunches or hot cognitions, the point is the critical A is the thinking at A that you have about the negative state of affairs that you are facing that is the most distressing aspect of the negative state of affairs that you're facing. So, for example, if I thought I was having a conversation tomorrow with someone and I predicted in my head that it would go badly, I might describe the situation away as tomorrow I'm going to have a conversation with so-and-so. But the critical way would be they're not going to buy what I have to say. They're going to push back. They're going to resist. They may even reject me. So the critical A is something that we encourage you to take time to identify. It could be in the future, or it can even be a hunch that you have about the past. For example, you could say, I was rejected in the past for this reason, even though I have no evidence of it. I was rejected in the past because I was not exactly the type of person that was being sought after in a particular job, even though I might have had the best skills. So that's a hunch. We don't know if it's true, or we don't know if it's false. And the rejection took place in the past. But the point is that in rational emotive behavior therapy, we don't, initially at least, question the validity of that hunch, that inference. What we do is we use it as a stepping stone to identify deeper level cognitions called attitudes that we believe lie at the base of our emotional disturbance. I like to say, don't chase the inference, because it's very tempting to chase the inference when someone tells you about a problem and you are inclined to try to persuade them to not think the worst case scenario. This happens a lot when a friend comes to you and talks to you about something they're anxious about. You'll try to tell them how their hunches about what's going to happen in the future may be false to the facts, that they're jumping to conclusions. And this is typically what's done in what I call generic cognitive behavior therapy. Now, the problem with doing this is that sometimes our hunches are correct. Sometimes our worst nightmares occur. In my view, they sooner or later occur. And so REBT takes a totally different approach, one that protects you for that worst case scenario by helping you first to identify that worst case hunch. I'm going to get rejected tomorrow. But rather than looking at the evidence that may be false, working with you to develop a healthy attitude so that you could tolerate that, so you could accept that, so you can survive it. Now, before you can accept something, you first have to look at the basic attitudes that you hold that disturb you about that negative prediction you're making. And so we don't want you to jump to acceptance and say, oh, it's just about accepting it. You need to first identify your critical A about what you think is going to happen tomorrow, what you think was the reason certain events occurred in the past. And if you're upset about those past events or upset about your future predicted adversity, what you need to do is figure out what that critical inference is and specify it. And a lot of people don't like to do that. They just like to describe in a loose way their critical A. But by taking the time to identify the critical A, what you really do is tighten your understanding of your emotional experience. You bring into focus your understanding, and it allows your efforts to dispute your rigid and extreme attitudes at point B to be far more impactful. Now, in rational emotive behavior therapy, we also encourage you to look at your consequences, your emotional and behavioral consequences at C. And so usually the best order for disputing is to first identify the hot cognition, the distressing aspects of the adversity at A. I will fail. I will get rejected. I won't get invited. He will betray me. Or in the past, I failed and let people down. Well, you may have failed. That might be an objective fact, but the letting people down may very well be an inference that you are holding about other people's reactions to the efforts that you made in the past. So what we want you to do is identify the critical A, then look at your emotional reaction, identify the self-defeating components. There are 8 basic emotions. We want you to identify the emotion. Is it depression? Is it anger? Is it shame, guilt, anxiety, envy, jealousy, hurt? And the behaviors that are undermining, adapting to whatever it is you predict will happen or predict did happen. And once you understand the self-defeating elements of your reaction, you're going to be more inclined to really think deeply about your rigid and extreme attitudes that lie at the base of your emotional disturbance and self-defeating response. The critical A is critical. You need to understand well what it is that you're anxious about. What is it about tomorrow that you find most anxiety provoking? What is it that you think will happen tomorrow that is most anxiety provoking? Will the doctor tell you you have cancer? Or is it that you're saying it's going to be a painful biopsy, the procedure that will take place tomorrow? I'm not worried about the outcome. It's just the act of getting the biopsy done that I'm anxious about. Bringing into focus the critical A is really essential to effective disputing. Now, the other thing that's really important to do is, again, to resist the temptation to chase what I call that inference, to reassure people or reassure yourself. Instead of saying, well, maybe the biopsy won't be as painful as I think it will be, say to yourself, let me assume it'll be painful. Now, what's my attitude towards pain? I can't bear pain. I must not have brief moments of pain, even if those brief moments of pain are good for me in the long run, because I'll figure out what exactly is this mass that I have. So it's very important, and this is what makes REBT, in my view, so powerful. We prepare people for the worst case scenario. We remain hopeful that perhaps it won't occur, but we prepare people for that worst case scenario. This can be a hard sell. People don't want to go and prepare for the worst case scenario. They want to hope that things will turn out okay. And maybe that's why a small number of practitioners practice REBT and why generic cognitive behavior therapy is more commonplace. However, I encourage you to think about the REBT premise that you can run, but you can't hide, and that sooner or later, bad things happen, and the data will suggest that they're going to happen, and you may know that, and you're not distorting anything. You know what's going to happen, or you don't know, but your anticipation, your hunch might very well be accurate. And then do the REBT disputing to help you challenge the idea that that bad thing must not happen, that you couldn't bear it if it did happen, that it would be awful if it happened, rather than very bad, but not necessarily the end of the world, that life would be not totally bad. You might think it'll be totally bad, and that's why you're anxious, but the disputing will help you to see that if it happened, life would be bad, but it would still be a mix of good and bad events. I have stayed with REBT for 32 years because I truly believe that people are capable of greater degrees of strength and well-being if they take the time to work hard at what we call the elegant philosophical position that REBT espouses. At the end of the therapeutic discussion, you can go back and evaluate whether or not your inference is biased and may very well be distorted. But don't chase that inference from the get-go. When you're doing self-therapy or when you're doing therapy with someone else, live with the tension of considering the worst-case scenario and identify what it is about that worst-case scenario that you find most challenging, most threatening, most painful. That's the critical A. And then don't assume you're distorting about that. Just assume that that's what's going to happen and then use it as a stepping stone to get to those rigid and extreme attitudes that we all use to disturb ourselves and create unhealthy emotional and behavioral reactions. This is what makes REBT, in my view, and I would encourage you to set yourself up for the serenity or the at least confidence that REBT can give to you, or you can give to yourself, by not chasing the inference, not looking to invalidate that inference at A, but really assuming it to be true and then taking a deep dive into your attitudes and identifying which ones are healthy and which ones are unhealthy. Every Saturday I do this during my session on Zoom with a volunteer. So when you watch that session, see if you can note how I'm not chasing the inference. I'm not seeking to reassure them. If I'm on my game, what I will be doing is encouraging them to identify that critical A and sit with the discomfort that that worst case scenario could very well come to pass. And then you'll observe how we try to identify the rigid and extreme attitudes that lie at the base of the volunteer's disturbance. I do this conversation every Saturday. I've now done it for more than 150 consecutive weeks. It's held at 9 a.m. in Philadelphia, which is at 2 p.m. in the UK, 4 p.m. in Bucharest, 6:30 in India, and 10 in Tokyo. About 100 people from around the world will observe this conversation. It's about a real problem. Anybody can volunteer. Anybody can attend it. It's for free. But you need the link. So write to me at REBT Doctor, DOCTOR, @gmail.com, and you will get the link, request the link at that email address, and I'll send you the link, and you can begin to observe this process. REBT teaches us in my view, two kinds of things. REBT teaches us healthy attitudes and a process for correcting our thinking. Learning to identify the critical A and deepening your understanding of the ABC model is the process that we hope that you'll adopt and learn to do expertly so that you can, in the future, become your own therapist. I hope to see you on Saturday, and I hope that you read today's intermittent email that corresponds to this video, or listen to this video again to really deeply understand what we're trying to say. But when you have a thorough understanding of the ABC framework, you're in a far better position to do what we call disputing that is quite impactful. Hope to see you on Saturday.